They operated on my heart, and my 5 children swore to take care of me. 20 days passed, and not a single visit, pure loneliness. I am Harriet, 73 years old, a widow with a firm character. They thought I was dying, but my signature will ruin their lives. The first memory I have upon waking up from the anesthesia is the rhythmic sound of a machine and a pain that split my chest in two, literally in two. The surgeon had sawed open my sternum like a cheap piece of antique furniture in desperate need of repair. My mouth was bone dry, tasting of copper and heavy medication, and my eyelids weighed a ton, like they were cast in lead. I could barely peel my eyes open, searching the room for the shadow of any of my kids. Eric, Chloe, Julian, Sylvia, Gavin, any of the 5. They had put on a spectacular theatrical performance in the waiting room right before they wheeled me into the OR. A perfectly rehearsed choir of worried voices, promising, "We're taking turns taking care of you, Mom. Don't you worry about a thing. We've got everything handled." But there was no one. Just the stark white hospital wall and a ticking analog clock pointing to 3 in the afternoon. I figured it was just day 1, the day of chaos. Eric is a lawyer and always claims he's drowning in paperwork. Maybe he had an emergency hearing, or maybe Chloe couldn't find a sitter for her kids. I've always been a pragmatic woman. For 40 years, I owned the ironclad hardware store, right in the beating heart of a neighborhood where people talk loud and work hard. Behind that counter, I learned how to measure nails, mix paint, cut glass, and above all, read people. The hardware store taught me that life is raw and concrete. That's exactly why, on that first day, I justified my children's absence with the exact same cold logic I used to tally up my customers' debts in my old ledger. A ledger I had instinctively tucked into my purse before checking into the hospital. But then came day 2, and then day 3, and day 4. The pain in my chest was a burning ember every single time I tried to take a deep breath, but that physical agony was starting to compete with a very different kind of burning in the pit of my stomach. Nurses drifted in and out. They checked my blood pressure, swapped out my IV bags, helped me shift positions in bed, because on my own, I couldn't move a single inch of my own body. Every time that door creaked open, I turned my head with the foolish hope of seeing one of my 5 children poke their head in. By the 5th day, the silence in my room wasn't just the absence of noise anymore. It was a message, clear and devastating. The hospital operated on its own mechanical rhythm. The squeak of the medication cart, the sharp sting of cheap lemon disinfectant, the tasteless slide of diet gelatin. It all becomes suffocating when the only thing you have to distract yourself is the echo of your own thoughts. I would stare up at the ceiling tiles and review my entire life. I was widowed young. My husband left me a hardware store and 5 mouths to feed. I broke my back, covered my hands in calluses and grease, just so none of them would ever go without. I sold off my best power tools to put Eric through law school. I bought every single appliance in Chloe's house when she got married, so she'd have a decent start. I bailed Julian out of 3 absurdly bankrupt business ventures, paying off his debts with my own sweat. I gave Sylvia the down payment for her house because my little girl refused to rent. And Gavin, the youngest and most reckless, I paid for the lawyers to dig him out of trouble I don't even want to remember. Day 10 arrived. The incision started to itch, a sign it was healing on the outside, but inside, something was rotting. That morning, they forced me out of bed to walk a few steps. They handed me a little heart-shaped pillow to clutch tightly against my chest if I needed to cough, because a single sneeze or cough made it feel like I was ripping apart from the inside. I shuffled down the cardiology wing, dragging my feet, clinging to the IV pole. I looked into the other rooms. I saw old men surrounded by grandchildren. I saw women my age having their hair brushed by their daughters-in-law. I saw grown sons sleeping in uncomfortable plastic chairs just so they wouldn't leave their mothers alone in the dead of night. And there I was, Harriet, the toughest woman in the neighborhood, the one who used to sling bags of cement, wandering alone like a ghost in a faded hospital gown. Day 12 was the breaking point. It was the exact moment the blindfold slipped from my eyes and shattered into dust on the floor. My attending nurse was Lydia, a young woman with gentle and a deeply compassionate gaze. She was giving me a sponge bath because I still couldn't raise my arms above my shoulders. She was carefully drying my back, trying so hard not to hurt me. Suddenly, she paused. She looked at me through the mirror of that cramped bathroom and asked the one question that sliced through my soul faster than the surgeon's scalpel. "Harriet, I'm so sorry to pry, but do you have any family?" I froze. The glycerin soap slipped right through my fingers and hit the shower floor with a dull thud. I felt the blood drain straight down to my feet. It was shame. A shame so massive, so suffocating, that I could barely find my voice. For one split second of weakness, I almost cried. I almost told her that I had 5 children, 5 pieces of my own flesh and blood, walking and breathing in this world because of me. But my hardware store pride saved me. I wasn't about to let anyone pity me. I despise pity. Rust eats iron, and pity eats the human spirit. "I have 5, I replied, my voice raspy, staring at my own haggard reflection in the mirror. "But they are very important people, very busy, all of them. I asked them not to come. I don't like a fuss in hospitals." Lydia nodded in silence, but I saw it in her eyes. She didn't buy a single word. Nurses know everything. They see who visits, who calls, and who abandons. That day, when I got back into bed, I asked her to hand me my purse. I pulled out my old green vinyl ledger and opened it to the middle pages. There were no tallies of screws or gallons of paint in there. That's where I kept my kids' phone numbers, their birthdays, and a brief summary of the will I had drawn up a decade ago. 10 years back, when the doctors first caught a murmur in my heart, I went straight to Lawyer Mitchell's office. I left everything in perfect order. The house, which is huge and sits in a neighborhood that's worth serious money now. The commercial property of the hardware store, which I still own, even though I lease it out, and my bank savings. The cash from a lifetime of never buying myself new clothes so I could give everything to them. It was split into 5 perfectly equal slices, 20% each, the blind justice of a mother. That afternoon in the hospital, staring at my ledger, I traced over every single name. Eric, Chloe, Julian, Sylvia, Gavin. I whispered them into the quiet room, tasting the bitter ash of every syllable. I finally understood what was happening. It was just math. The pure, cold logic of selfish people. If I died on the operating table, they'd split the loot, cry for an hour at the wake, and look like the perfect grieving children to the neighbors. If I survived, the hospital would babysit me until I was ready to leave, saving them the dirty work of cleaning my wounds, listening to my complaints, and losing sleep. They had simply put me in storage, the way you leave a broken toaster at the repair shop, waiting for the call to pick it up when it's finally fixed. Days 15 through 19 brought a terrifying mental clarity. The physical pain faded, but my mind started spinning at a speed that's honestly scared me. I'd stopped looking at the door. I stopped waiting. The sadness drained away, swirling down the exact same drain as the water from my lonely showers. In place of that sorrow, a new heat, dark, heavy, powerful, set up camp in my newly repaired chest. It was indignation. It was pure, highly concentrated rage, a cold, calculating fury. I finally saw the invisible trap of old age. When you get old, your kids start looking at you like an antique piece of furniture. They tolerate you, they dust you off every once in a while, but deep down, they're just waiting for the day they get to inherit the wood. Day 20 arrived. Discharge day. The doctor came in first thing in the morning, checked my scar, listened to my heart with his stethoscope, and smiled. He told me my recovery was an absolute miracle for my age. Said I had a strong heart. I told him, entirely in my head, that my heart was now forged from stainless steel. He signed my discharge papers and told me I could call my family to come pick me up. They need to bring a wheelchair right up to the door, Miss Harriet. No sudden exertion. And remember, absolute bed rest at home. You need someone to cook for you and assist you for at least 2 more weeks. I thanked the doctor with a stiff nod. When I was finally alone in the room, I stared at the landline on the nightstand. I could call them. I could dial Eric's number and tell him to come get me. I knew he would. He'd invent some cheap excuse about a sudden business trip, and then he'd drive me home playing the savior. But I didn't touch the phone. With slow, millimeter-precise movements, I pushed myself out of bed. My chest pulled tight. A dull pressure reminded me that my bones had been sawed in half less than 3 weeks ago. I opened the little metal locker in the corner. There were my clothes, the exact same outfit I wore the day I checked in. A gray skirt, a button-down blouse, and my sensible low heels. It took me 45 minutes to get dressed. Every single button on that blouse was a war against the pain. I had to sit on the edge of the bed 3 separate times just to catch my breath. I was in a cold sweat, but every time I felt like I couldn't go on, I remembered that hollow promise in the waiting room. "We're taking turns taking care of you, Mom." That sentence gave me the brute strength I needed. I brushed my silver hair and patted a little powder on my face in front of the bathroom mirror. I wasn't going to walk out of this hospital looking like a victim. I grabbed my purse, double-checking that my green ledger and my ID were safely tucked inside. When I stepped out into the hallway, Nurse Lydia saw me and came running, her eyes wide with panic. "Miss Harriet, what are you doing out of bed? Did your family arrive? Let me grab a wheelchair." I held up a single hand to stop her. It wasn't an aggressive gesture, but one of absolute authority. The exact same authority I used to run my hardware store. "No, Lydia, my family isn't here, and they aren't coming. And I don't want the wheelchair. I am walking out of this place on my own 2 feet. She tried to protest. She rattled off hospital policy, the risk of fainting, the stairs. I tuned her out. I walked down the long corridor of the cardiology wing, gripping my purse in one hand and pressing the other flat against my chest under my blouse. Every step was a brutal victory over my own weakness. The security guards on the ground floor looked at me with hesitation, but my expression must have been so terrifyingly hard that neither of them dared tell me to sit down. I walked right through those automatic sliding glass doors, and the hot street air slapped me across the face. The roar of traffic, the harsh smell of exhaust fumes, the chaotic pulse of the city. To me, it was completely beautiful. I was alive, and I was entirely on my own. Not by the grace of ungrateful children, but by my own sheer will. I raised my arm on the avenue. An empty cab slammed on its brakes right in front of me. The driver, a young kid in a baseball cap, jumped out the second he saw me hunched over and practically carried me into the back seat. I leaned back against the upholstery, breathing hard. The pain was blinding, but the adrenaline pumping through my veins was 1,000 times stronger. "Where to, ma'am? Heading home?" the driver asked, eyeing me in the rearview mirror, clearly terrified by how pale I was. I adjusted the collar of my blouse, closed my eyes for a second to gather whatever air my lungs would allow, and opened my purse just to feel the rough texture of my green ledger. I smiled. A smile that had absolutely nothing sweet or maternal about it. It was the smile of a woman who just realized she's still holding the loaded gun. "No, son, not home," I answered, my voice sharp and clear. "Take me to Main and 10th. To the law offices of Mitchell and Associates. I have an urgent transaction. A little math problem I need to correct." That cab ride was a masterclass in brand new types of pain. Every pothole the kid failed to dodge, every hard break at an intersection, sent an electric shock straight into my cracked sternum. I gripped the door handle with my right hand while my left hand clamped down on my chest, desperately trying to hold my own bones together. The kid kept checking on me in the mirror, his eyes wide, eyebrows practically in his hairline. He probably thought I was going to drop dead in his back seat and ruin his shift. I held his gaze in the glass and gave him a sharp nod to keep his eyes on the road. I wasn't going to die. Death and I had already settled our accounts in the OR spore. Now, it was time to settle accounts with the living. I stared out the window. The city was moving at its usual frantic pace. I saw women hauling groceries, office workers sprinting with coffee cups, teenagers laughing on corners. It hit me then. The world doesn't stop to wait for anyone, least of all the elderly. In this society, once you hit 70, you become transparent. You're an obstacle in the bank line. You're a nuisance in traffic. You're just an old piece of furniture taking up space in your own family's house. Old age is an invisibility cloak nobody ever asked to wear. They strip you of your voice, they strip you of your authority, and they assume that just because your skin is wrinkling, your brain must be shrinking too. My 5 kids had fallen right into that trap. They looked at me hooked up to monitors in a hospital bed and didn't see Harriet, the woman who built a hardware empire from the ground up. They saw an inheritance about to clear. They saw an unsupervised checkbook. We pulled up to Main Street. I told the driver to stop in front of a grim, gray building with heavy oak doors. Lawyer Mitchell's firm. I opened my purse, pulled out my wallet, and paid the exact fare, leaving a perfectly reasonable tip. No charity, just fair payment for a job well done. A merchant's habit. Pushing open the heavy glass door of the law firm was my first massive physical triumph of the day. It weighed a ton, but I leaned my shoulder into it and shoved with the sheer force of my own rage. The blast of air conditioning in the lobby hit my face. It smelled like old paper, printer ink, and burnt coffee. The receptionist, a young girl with bright red nails, looked up from her monitor. The second she saw me, her bored expression flipped to pure panic. I knew exactly how I looked. I was chalk white. I was hunched over. I was wearing clothes that had been crammed in a hospital locker for 20 days, and my breathing sounded like a rusted whistle. "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you want me to call an ambulance?" she asked, jumping out of her chair. "I don't need an ambulance, sweetheart. I need to see Lawyer Mitchell. Tell him Harriet, the owner of the ironclad hardware store, needs to speak with him this very second. Mr. Mitchell is reviewing some deeds, ma'am. You don't have an appointment. Tell him I am standing right here." I cut her off, dropping my voice into the deep, gravelly tone I used to collect debts from deadbeat contractors. "And tell him if he doesn't see me in 3 minutes, I am taking my entire estate to the firm across the street." The girl swallowed hard, nodded frantically, and vanished down a hallway. Less than a minute later, she came rushing back, with Mitchell right on her heels. He had aged too. Less hair, more gut, heavy reading glasses hangings around his neck. But he was still the same sharp legal mind who helped me zone my first commercial lots 40 years ago. When he saw me, Mitchell stopped dead in his tracks. "Good God, Harriet," he gasped, practically jogging over to me. "What are you doing here? Eric told me 2 weeks ago that you were on death's door, that you barely survived the surgery. He told me they were sitting vigil at your bedside, day and night." A dry laugh, sounding exactly like sandpaper on raw wood, scraped its way out of my throat. The effort hurt like hell, but I couldn't hold it back. "Eric always did have a vivid imagination for fairy tales, Mitchell. Take me to your office. I need a chair, and we have a lot of work to do." Mitchell offered his arm. I leaned on it just enough to keep from collapsing on his marble floor. We walked into his office, a massive room with mahogany furniture and bookshelves groaning under the weight of thick binders. I let myself drop into the leather chair across from his desk. The relief of releasing the weight of my own body was indescribable. Mitchell poured me a glass of sparkling water. I took a tiny sip, straightened my posture, and pulled the green vinyl ledger out of my purse. I slammed it down on his desk with a heavy thud. "Boot up your computer, Mitchell. We are shredding a document today, and we are writing a brand new one. Right now." The lawyer looked at me with deep concern, rubbing his jaw. "Harriet, you just walked out of an operating room. You should be resting. Are you absolutely sure You want to be making major legal moves in this state. The anesthesia, the painkillers. Your son Eric could easily argue you aren't in your right mind. That was the magic word. Eric, the family attorney, the eldest son who thought he was so much smarter than his mother. I am 73 years old, Mitchell. I am not dead, and I am certainly not crazy. I shot back, flipping the green ledger open to the centerfold. And exactly because I know how Eric's mind works, we are going to make this completely bulletproof. I am not leaving a single legal loophole for that vulture to stick his beak into. I began my asset evaluation. In my hardware store brain, life has always been a simple inventory check. You have your incoming, your outgoing, your assets, and your liabilities. Over the last 3 weeks, my 5 children had proven themselves to be the biggest liabilities of my entire existence. It was time to liquidate the defective merchandise and protect the capital. Write this down, Mitchell. First asset. That house was a palace compared to the cramped back room of the hardware stores where we slept during the early years. It had 5 bedrooms, a massive yard, and top-tier finishes. Chloe had been secretly measuring the windows for years. Every time she visited, she'd mention how much she loved the natural light in the main living room, clearly daydreaming about the day she could move her husband and her loud brats into my domain, shoving me into the maid's quarters. The house is no longer being split 5 ways, I dictated, planting my hands flat on the open ledger. The house is now the absolute property of a blind trust. All profits from its sale or rental will go directly to the cardiology wing of General Hospital. Specifically, I want a fund set up for the nursing staff, so that women like Lydia never lack medical supplies or a decent paycheck. Mitchell's eyes went wide, but his fingers started flying across the keyboard. Second asset, I continued, feeling the pain in my chest magically shrink with every word, replaced by a pure, cleansing adrenaline. The commercial property on the corner of South Avenue, where the hardware store operates. That was Eric's holy grail. The land alone was worth a fortune. He had hinted multiple times that nails and paint were relics of the past, that we should demolish my life's work to build a sleek tower of law offices. The building and the land go directly to Old Ray, my tenant and former employee. That man has worked there for 30 years. Breaking his back hauling bags of plaster, and he has never missed a single month of rent. The property is his. Put an ironclad life estate clause on it so my kids can't trick him out of it. Harriet, this is nuclear, Mitchell muttered, pausing his typing for a split second. You're leaving them out in the cold. They will contest the will. Eric is going to claim you were heavily medicated and coerced. I smiled, a razor-sharp grin without a drop of sweetness. That's exactly where your lawyer magic comes in, Mitchell. Combined with my intimate knowledge of my own offspring, I'm not leaving them out in the cold. I'm going to leave them something highly specific, something that will prove to any judge in this state that I was in full possession of my mental faculties and that I remembered every single one of them perfectly. I flipped a page in my green ledger. I had mapped out the details at 3 a.m. in my hospital bed, listening to the guy in the next snore. Third asset. The bank accounts and the safe deposit boxes. Julian, my failed entrepreneur son, always looked at my checkbook, like it was a magic wand to cure his incompetence. Sylvia wanted my solid gold jewelry, the pieces I bought with my very first savings to show off at her country club galas. And Gavin, the spoiled baby, was just waiting for a quick cash injection to buy another sports car he'd inevitably wrap around a telephone pole. All liquid cash, investments, and the contents of the safe deposit boxes will be liquidated and moved into a private account under my exclusive name, managed by an external accounting firm. I am going to spend that money down to the very last dime, and if there's anything left when they put me in the ground, it goes straight to St. Jude's orphanage. And what exactly are you leaving them, then? Mitchell asked, genuinely fascinated, leaning over his mahogany desk. To Eric, my brilliant lawyer, I leave my antique manual cash register, the one that jammed every single time you hit a zero, so he can finally learn how to calculate the time he never spent with me. To Chloe, I leave my grandmother's collection of silver thimbles. She despises sewing, always said it was maid's work. She can keep them. To Julian, I bequeath the entire inventory of rusted screws from the old warehouse, 3 tons of useless metal. Let him try to sell that to pay off his loan sharks. To Sylvia, I leave my work clothes. My apron's permanently stained with grease and paint, so she never forgets exactly where the money came from to pay for her luxury mansion. And to Gavin, I leave my old delivery bicycle, the one with the blown-out tire, so he can finally learn how to move forward under his own power. Mitchell let out a booming, gravelly laugh. He couldn't hold it in. He pulled off his glasses and wiped a tear from his eye. "You are diabolical, Harriet. No judge in this country would ever believe a senile woman drafted a will with this much irony and personal detail. This proves absolute lucidity. It shows intent, premeditation, and a flawless memory." "Exactly," I said, slamming the green ledger shut with a crack that echoed off the walls. "The logic is incredibly simple. If you abandon a construction job halfway through, you don't get paid for the contract. They promised to take care of me. They promised to take turns. And they left me to rot like an old dog. 20 days. They figured the hospital would do the dirty work, and I'd just quietly fade away. They messed with the wrong mother." I leaned back in the chair, feeling the steady thumping of my brand new heart. The surgeon had done stellar work. Yes, my chest was on fire, but the internal machinery was ticking with the precision of a freshly oiled clock. While Mitchell drafted the document with all the proper legal jargon, I plotted my next chess move. I couldn't go home. If I went back to Fairview Estates, Eric and Chloe would show up eventually, faking concern, demanding spare keys, trying to lock me down under the guise of my convalescence. I needed neutral territory, a place where I dictated the rules of engagement. "Mitchell, I need one more favor off the books," I said, interrupting the clatter of his keyboard. "Name it, Harriet. Log in my bank account right now and wire some funds. I want you to call the most expensive private nursing agency in this city, the one that caters to politicians and billionaires. I want a registered nurse on retainer, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Done. Send her to your house. No. Call the Grand Empire Hotel, the one right across from Central Park. Book a double suite in my name for an entire month, with room service and on-call medical attention. That is where I am spending my recovery." Mitchell looked at me with a mix of awe and deep respect. "You're going to burn through a fortune, woman." "It's my fortune," I replied, staring down at my hands, which still carried the faded scars of decades gripping cold tools. I spent 40 years inhaling cement dust and smelling like paint thinner so those 5 ingrates could live like royalty. Now it's my turn to have breakfast served in bed with solid silver cutlery. The lawyer nodded, understanding completely. He printed the pages of the new will. The paper was still warm from the printer. He handed me a thick, black fountain pen. I read every single paragraph meticulously. It was all there. The trust for the hospital nurses, the deed for Old Ray, the orphanage, and the deeply humiliating distribution of scrap metal, aprons, and thimbles for my 5 legal heirs. No loopholes, no typos. It was a flawless document, an absolute masterpiece of legal masonry. I took the pen. My right hand trembled just a fraction. Not from physical weakness, but from the raw emotion flooding my veins. I planted my wrist firmly on the desk and signed every single page. My signature was large, angular, aggressive. The exact same signature that had authorized thousands of checks and invoices over the decades. When I was done, I handed the pen back to Mitchell. He stamped his official notary seal and signed the bottom. The clock was ticking. The trap was set. My kids thought they had me perfectly boxed away in a hospital bed, docilely waiting for them to dictate my fate. They had no idea the chessboard had just flipped entirely. I was no longer the self-sacrificing mother begging for scraps of affection. I was the boss of the hardware store, and I had just permanently closed their lines of credit. Now, all I had to do was move into my new fortress and wait for the curtain to rise. The silent execution of my revenge had just begun, and I was going to enjoy every single second of it from the front row. The Grand Empire Hotel smelled of beeswax, polished mahogany, and a white floral perfume I had never once encountered in the gritty streets around my hardware store. When I walked through those revolving glass doors, discreetly leaning on the bellhop's arm, I felt like I was crossing the border into a completely different country. I was leaving behind the stench of cheap hospital disinfectant and the brick dust of my past life. The hotel manager was already waiting in the lobby, tipped off by the platinum credit card lawyer Mitchell had authorized over the phone. They gave me the presidential suite on the 12th floor. When I walked in, a laugh almost slipped out that would have cost me a pulled muscle in my sternum. The carpets were so thick, my shoes sank into them. There were crystal chandeliers and massive floor-to-ceiling windows that made the entire city look like a tiny architect's model. Me, Harriet, the woman who slept on a cot for 10 years behind a counter full of washers and hammers. Now, I had a mahogany dining table and a marble bathroom the size of my old house entirely to myself. Valerie arrived an hour later. She was the private nurse Mitchell hired. She was absolutely nothing like the rushed, underpaid girls at the public hospital. Valerie was in her 50s, possessed military posture, wore an immaculate white uniform, and carried a medical bag that looked straight out of a movie. She took my blood pressure, inspected my score with incredible gentleness, and organized my pills on the nightstand without asking a single unnecessary question. She didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me like I was the boss, and that was exactly what I needed. Mrs. Harriet, my job is to ensure you do not lift a single finger unless it is strictly necessary, Valerie told me, settling me into a green velvet recliner. I will bathe you, administer your medication, and oversee your diet. Your only job is to heal. I nodded, closing my eyes for a second. The pain in my chest was still there, lurking like a guard dog, but the sheer humiliation of being abandoned was evaporating into thin air. Now, my body rested on Egyptian cotton sheets, while my brain whirred with the precision of a bank vault lock. Over the next 2 days, I focused on fortifying my trench. I pulled my green vinyl ledger from my purse and placed it on the coffee table right next to a bowl of fresh strawberries that room service delivered every morning. That ledger was my command center. Inside it, I jotted down the strict orders I gave the hotel manager. No phone calls would be transferred to my suite without my explicit approval. And absolutely no visitors were allowed up to the 12th floor under any circumstances. If anyone asked for me, they were to say I was a maximum privacy VIP guest. It was on the 4th day of my hotel stay, day 24 since my open heart surgery, that I finally decided to power on my old cell phone. I had kept it off on purpose. I wanted to give them time. I wanted the pressure cooker of their own negligence to build up enough steam before it blew. Once the screen lit up, the phone vibrated in my hand for almost 3 solid minutes. I thought the battery was going to shake itself loose. I had 68 missed calls, over 100 text messages, and 3 voicemail alerts. I put on my reading glasses, took a slow sip of chamomile tea, and opened my messages. The timeline of my 5 children's panic was a fascinating theatrical script to read. The first texts were from day 21, exactly 24 hours after I walked out of the hospital. The first was from Eric. Mom, the hospital admin just called. They said you were discharged yesterday and left alone. Are you crazy? Where are you? I went to our house and you're not there. I read it and gave a half smile. Eric wasn't worried about my health. He was highly offended that his patient had escaped the pen without asking for permission. The brilliant attorney couldn't handle losing control. Next came the text from Chloe, the undisputed drama queen of Fairview Estates. Mom, for the love of God, where are you? My friends from the club keep asking about you, and I don't know what to tell them. You are making me look ridiculous. Julian went to look for you at the hardware store, and old Ray slammed the rolling door in his face. Ah! My loyal old Ray. I had called him from the hotel to give him a heads up. I told him if my kids showed up snooping around the property, he was to play deaf and blind. The old employee, who knew me vastly better than my own flesh and blood, just replied, "You got it, Miss Harriet." I wouldn't give those parasites the time of day. I kept scrolling. The tone of the messages morphed as the hours ticked by. They went from mild annoyance to deep confusion, and from confusion to pure, unadulterated terror. The specific terror of heirs who can't locate the body or the will. Sylvia, my spoiled little princess of designer dresses and diamonds, had left a voice note, sobbing hysterically. Mommy, please pick up. Gavin says, maybe you had a heart attack on the street and you're in a morgue as a Jane Doe. We are desperate. I stopped right there. My chest gave a sharp twinge, and it wasn't from the cracked bone. It was the very last shred of maternal instinct trying to stage a rebellion. That foolish little voice that tells you a mother is supposed to comfort her young, no matter what they do. But then I remembered staring at the hospital ceiling for 20 days. I remembered Lydia washing me with a sponge, while I choked down the shame of having absolutely no one. I crushed that maternal instinct with the exact same brute force I used to flatten bent nails with a hammer. They weren't crying for their mother. They were crying for their ATM. I didn't reply to a single message. I clicked the screen dark, tossed the phone onto my green ledger, and let them keep sweating. At the hardware store, I learned early on that when a customer owes you money and goes into hiding, the worst thing you can do is chase them. You just sit back and wait until they need to buy something else. My kids needed me. I was their exclusive supply line of comfort. On the 5th day of my stay, the Sweetslitz landline rang. It was Lawyer Mitchell. Valerie handed me the receiver while adjusting the pillows behind my back. Harriet, it is an absolute circus out here, the lawyer said. And even though he was trying to sound strictly professional, I could hear the pure entertainment in his voice. Eric just stormed out of my office. He kicked the door open, demanding to know if I had any idea where you were. He threatened to sue me for withholding critical information. And what did you tell him, you old fox? I asked, feeling a dark, warm thrill rushing through my veins. I told him attorney-client privilege prevents me from disclosing the whereabouts of my clients, and that, as far as I knew, you were a fully grown adult in complete possession of your mental faculties. He turned ghost white, Harriet. Started stammering that you were incapacitated by the surgery. That someone must have kidnapped you to steal your real estate. He demanded I show him your latest will. I hope you showed him the exit. Of course I did. I told him if he didn't leave immediately, I was calling building security. But watch your back, Harriet. Eric isn't stupid. He's already pulling strings. A colleague tipped me off that Julian and Gavin are bouncing between banks trying to freeze your accounts, citing senile dementia. I let out a laugh so hard I had to fiercely hug the little heart-shaped pillow Valerie had given me to protect my chest. Let them try, I replied, wiping a tear of pure comedy from the corner of my eye. Every cent of liquid capital is already sitting in the trust account, managed by the corporate firm. My old personal accounts have about $50 left in them. They are going to smash their heads against a brick wall. Thanks, Mitchell. Keep me posted. I hung up. The chess match was reaching its climax. My strategic moves were clicking into place like freshly oiled gears. My kids were crashing into each other, desperate. Hunting for cash that was no longer where they thought it was, hunting for the docile mother who no longer existed. But I knew total anonymity couldn't last forever. I had deliberately dropped a tiny, shiny piece of bait for them to find exactly when I wanted them to. Gavin always had read-only access to one of my lower-limit credit cards. the one I used to automatically pay the electric bill for his bachelor pad. I hadn't canceled it. Just the night before, I had asked Valerie to run down to the hotel boutique and buy me 3 Italian silk robes, paying with that exact card. The charge was bound to pop up on Gavin's phone alerts sooner or later. It was my 7th day at the hotel, almost a full month since my open-heart surgery, when the bomb finally detonated. I was just finishing my lunch, a spectacular cream of asparagus soup, when the room phone rang again. This time it wasn't Mitchell. It was the hotel manager, and he sounded incredibly tense, almost apologetic. "Miss Harriet, I am so sorry to bother you. We have a situation down in the main lobby. There are 5 people here. A man in a suit claiming to be a lawyer, 2 highly agitated women, and 2 other men. They swear they are your children. The one in the suit is threatening to call the press and the police if we don't let them up to 12 immediately." The moment had arrived, the proxy war. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs, but it was a solid, powerful rhythm. The brand new machine they installed in my chest was running flawlessly. I glanced at Valerie, who was already standing right next to me, arms crossed, looking fierce, ready to defend my peace with her life. "Relax, Mr. Manager," I answered with ice-cold calm. "I warned you this might happen. Do not let them up the elevators under circumstances, but hold off on calling the cops just yet. Patch them through to the lobby intercom system."
"Want to speak to them?"
"Right away, ma'am." There were a couple of clicks on the line, a burst of static, and then pure chaos flooded into my luxury suite through the speaker. Mom, for the love of God!" It was Chloe's voice, shrill and dripping with fake tears. "Come down right now, or tell them to let us up. We were dying of anxiety, Mom. We thought you were murdered." "Mom, it's Eric!" My eldest son cut her off, desperately trying to project his fake courtroom authority. "This is a kidnapping, isn't it? Who is holding you up there? If someone is forcing you to pay for this absurdly expensive hotel, tell me right now and I'll come up with the police. Open your door immediately." I took my sweet time. I let the silence stretch over the open line for a solid 10 seconds. I wanted them to feel the crushing weight of my disgust through the copper wiring. I leaned into the receiver, resting my elbows right on top of my green ledger. "Nobody kidnapped me, Eric," I said, dropping my voice so it sounded low and menacing, like thunder rolling in before a storm. "I am here entirely of my own free will, paying with my own money. The money I earned hustling nails and concrete while you all slept until noon." "Mom," Sylvia sobbed in the background, "why are you doing this to us? We went to the hospital to take care of you, and you were gone." "Liar," I roared. The shout sent a spike of pain straight into my bone, but it was incredibly liberating, cleansing. I was a lump in that bed for 20 days. 20. I tallied every single one in my ledger. Nobody called, nobody came. Lydia, a nurse with 0 of my blood in her veins, washed my back while you vultures were mentally subdividing my real estate. "Ma'am, please, calm down. You're going to put too much strain on your heart." Valerie whispers beside me, resting a gentle hand on my shoulder. I held up a single finger to tell her I was perfectly fine. "Mom, are you confused from the anesthesia?" Eric pushed, dropping his volume, slipping into that condescending tone people use with toddlers or mental patients. "You had major surgery. You are experiencing delirium. Please tell the manager to give us a key. We are going to take you home to Fairview Estates." "I'll handle everything." That exact phrase. The same lie from the waiting room. "I'll handle everything." "You are never stepping foot inside my house again, Eric," I declared, hammering every syllable like I was striking steel. I went to the lawyer before I checked into this hotel. I ran an inventory check. And I decided that my capital is no longer going to finance a pack of ungrateful parasites. A graveyard silence fell over the line. I could perfectly picture their faces down in the lobby. I could picture Gavin breaking into a cold sweat, Chloe entirely forgetting to cry, Julian calculating his overdue loans, Sylvia clutching her fake pearl necklace, And Eric, finally realizing that the brick wall he'd just slammed into at full speed was me. "What did you do, Mom?" Julian asked, and his voice was genuinely shaking. Not out of sorrow. Out of raw fear. "I executed justice, son. Pure logic and simple math. Now, listen to me. All 5 of you. If you try to force your way up to this suite, the manager has strict orders to have hotel security drag you out by your collars. And if you even think about making a scene in the press or challenging my mental competency, I will personally buy a full-page ad in the Sunday paper and publish the exact dollar amount of how many times I saved you from total ruin, right next to the story of how you left me rotting in a public hospital." "Mom," Gavin tried to plead, but I cut him off at the knees. "The hardware store is permanently closed to you, and so are family visits. Go home and learn how to work for a living." Without waiting for a single breath of a reply, I slammed the phone down onto the receiver. The sharp click echoed through the dead silent room. I leaned back against the green velvet chair. Valerie was staring at me, eyes wide, still holding the blood pressure cuff, looking like she had just witnessed a Category 5 hurricane and wasn't sure if the building was about to collapse. I ran a hand through my silver hair, breathing slow and steady. I felt the scar beneath my blouse. The surgeon had sawed open my chest and fixed my physical heart. But it was me, armed with my green vinyl ledger and my ruthless memory, who had finally slapped a stainless steel padlock onto my life. The silent execution was over. The open warfare had just begun, and I had all the heavy artillery on my side. The silence that settled in the room after hanging up the phone was thicker than quick, dry cement. Valerie, still wide-eyed, stepped closer and gently wrapped the cuff around my left arm. I felt it inflate, squeezing my wrinkled skin. The nurse checked the digital monitor and let out a long, almost comical sigh. It was absolutely perfect. 120/80. Not a single blip. 10 minutes later, the hotel manager called up to confirm my 5 children had vacated the lobby. He told me, with a level of indiscretion I deeply appreciated, that they left in a screaming match. Eric was shoving Gavin. Chloe was sobbing hysterically, ruining her makeup. And Julian kicked one of the large potted plants by the entrance before peeling out in his car. The wolf pack had finally realized the pen was empty, and now they were turning their teeth on each other in sheer frustration. For the next 3 days, I watched as their houses of cards collapse from the luxurious comfort of my Egyptian cotton sheets. I didn't even have to leave the suite to know the panic had morphed into a raging forest fire in their lives. My green ledger held the exact due dates of their financial dependencies. It was the end of the month, collection season. On Tuesday, the accountant from the new management firm called to confirm the auxiliary credit cards had been successfully frozen. I pictured Sylvia sitting at her exclusive country club, her face burning beet red when the waiter told her the plastic was declined. On Wednesday, all automatic wire transfers were canceled. Julian must have gotten the bank alert that the mortgage payment on his empty warehouse had bounced for insufficient funds. And on Thursday, Eric discovered that the joint account he used for his law firm's representation expenses, which was actually just my hardware store savings, had been legally drained and transferred directly into my private trust. The barrage of phone calls started up again, but this time, there were no arrogant threats or demands on my voicemails. It was pure, unfiltered desperation. The money tap had been violently shut off and welded shut forever. By Friday, Eric decided to play his absolute last card, the exact card lawyer Mitchell and I were waiting for. Mitchell called me early that morning, chuckling under his breath. Eric had filed an emergency injunction with a family court judge to declare me mentally incompetent, citing accelerated senile dementia triggered by anesthesia and oxygen deprivation during surgery. He demanded the immediate nullification of all recent power of attorney documents and petitioned to be named my legal guardian for my own protection. If I had been the exact same woman from a month ago, the one waiting for a visitor in that hospital bed. That betrayal would have killed me out of sheer heartbreak. But the new Harriet only felt a massive spike of pure adrenaline. I gave Mitchell explicit orders. That very afternoon, a highly esteemed forensic psychiatrist, hired by the accounting firm, visited my suite. He ran me through memory tests, logic puzzles, mental math, and spatial orientation. We spent 2 hours discussing the fluctuating market price of steel and commercial leasing laws. When we were done, the doctor signed a certificate of mental competency. So rock solid you could have used it to pour the foundation for a skyscraper. I wasn't just sane. I was sharper than half the city. Armed with that document, Mitchell executed the next phase of the strategy. He sent formal legal summons to all 5 of my children's home addresses. He called them in for an extraordinary estate update meeting on Monday at 10 a.m. The location wasn't his law firm. It was the executive boardroom of the Grand Empire Hotel, exactly 2 floors below my suite. Monday arrived. I was up at 7 in the morning. The pain in my sternum was just a dull ache now, a quiet reminder that I was still breathing. I asked Valerie to help me dress, but this time, I wasn't putting on wrinkled gray hospital clothes. I had ordered a tailored, impeccable navy blue power suit, a white silk blouse, and elegant low heels. I slicked my silver hair back with hairspray and applied a sharp coat of lipstick. When I looked in the full-length mirror, I didn't see a frail, convalescing old woman. I saw the founder of the ironclad hardware store, ready to run a final inventory check. I took the elevator down to the 10th floor, flanked by Valerie and 2 hotel security guards the manager had generously provided. The boardroom smelled of polished mahogany and freshly brewed coffee. There was a massive oval table, black leather chairs, and crystal water pitchers. Lawyer Mitchell was already there, organizing thick folders at the head of the table, the seat reserved exclusively for me. I sat down at the head, resting my hands flat on the cold wood. Right to my right, I placed my green vinyl ledger. At 10 o'clock on the dot, the double oak doors swung open. My 5 children walked in single file, looking like inmates marching toward the defendant's bench. The contrast was absolutely brutal. I expected to see their usual swagger, but a week of financial terror and fear of the unknown had completely withered them. Eric had dark bags under his eyes and a sloppy tie. Chloe was biting her nails, a nervous habit she hadn't done since she was a little girl. Julian was sweating bullets. Sylvia was staring at the floor, her eyes swollen from crying, and Gavin looked like a scolded child desperate for a place to hide. When they saw me sitting there, completely upright, looking like a ruthless billionaire, all 5 of them froze in the doorway. "Come in and sit down," I ordered, projecting my hardware store voice, the one that absolutely does not take no for an answer. Lawyer Mitchell's time costs money, and my time is now worth its weight in gold. They took their seats across from me at the far side of the massive table. They looked terrified to even make a sound. Eric cleared his throat, desperately trying to scrape together whatever fake legal dignity he had left. "Mom, this is a ridiculous circus," he started, pressing his trembling hands flat against the table. "I filed a legal injunction. You cannot be making decisions. You are being manipulated. You are not in your right mind. We are taking you to see a doctor." Mitchell didn't even let him finish the sentence. He slid a copy of the forensic psychiatric evaluation across the polished wood until it hit Eric. "Knuckles, Miss Harriet was evaluated this past Fridays by Dr. Vance, an expert witness for the Superior Court, Attorney Eric," Mitchell said, flashing a razor-sharp smile. "His medical ruling states that your mother possesses a cognitive capacity well above average for her demographic. Any attempt to declare her incompetent will be treated as a frivolous lawsuit, and we will countersue for emotional damages. Now, shut your mouth and listen." Eric scanned the document, and the last drop of color drained from his face. He tried to swallow, but he looked like he was choking on sand. I called you here today. I took over, locking eyes with every single one of them, one by one, because uncertainty is terrible for digestion, and I don't want you harassing old Ray at the store or throwing tantrums at bank tellers. You have been officially notified that my assets are now under the management of a blind trust. And I want you to hear, from my own mouth and in front of my attorney, exactly how the inheritance you were so eager to collect while I rotted in that hospital has been divided. Chloe let out a choked sob. Mommy, don't say that. We were going to take turns. But there were issues, the kids, the school. I raised a single hand and dead silence ruled the room again. I cracked open my green ledger. First, the house in Fairview Estates. The one you were already measuring for curtains, Chloe. My daughter looked up, a microsecond of hope flashing in her eyes. The deed has been irrevocably transferred to a charitable foundation run by General Hospital. The rental income from that property will cover the salaries of 20 nurses. Women who actually know how to clean a wound and hand you a glass of water without complaining. The house is gone. It belongs to the hospital. Chloe clamped both hands over her mouth and started crying for real. Fat tears of total devastation. Her entire socialite castle had just imploded. Second, the land and the building of the ironclad hardware store. I kept speaking, pinning my gaze strictly on Eric. That prime real estate you wanted to bulldoze to build your glass-walled law firm, Eric. He clenched his fists, bracing for the impact before it even hit. I deeded it over to old Ray with a life estate clause. He has been the legal, rightful owner since last Thursday. The deeds are already filed. If any of you ever step foot on his lot demanding a single rusty nail, he will have you arrested for trespassing. That man broke his back for me for 30 years. He earned the bricks you vultures wanted to auction off to the highest bidder. Are you insane? Eric exploded, leaping out of his chair and slamming his hands on the table. That land is worth millions. It's the family legacy. You are robbing us of what is rightfully ours. The only right you had evaporated on day 12 of my hospital stay. The exact second a nurse asked me if I was an orphan. I roared, standing up right with him, completely ignoring the sharp pain in my chest. My voice bounced off the mahogany walls with a concussive force that made them shrink back into their leather chairs. Every single thing inside that hardware store, and every dime in my bank accounts, I built with my bare hands, hauling bags of plaster at 6 a.m. while you brats were eating hot pancakes. Do not ever talk to me about rights, you parasites. Eric collapsed back into his chair, utterly humiliated, crushed under the sheer weight of the truth. Valerie's instinctively took a step forward, but I gave her a polite nod to stand down. I smoothed my skirt and sat back down. Third, Mitchell said, taking the baton to keep my blood pressure steady. All investment accounts and safe deposit boxes have been entirely liquidated. The entire capital sits in a trust dedicated exclusively to the medical and personal care of your mother. Upon her passing, if any residual funds remain, they will automatically transfer to St. Jude's Orphanage. Not a single one of you is listed as a financial beneficiary. The impact of that final statement was the absolute kill shot. Julian grabbed his head with both hands, muttering something about loan sharks he owed money to. Sylvia stared blankly at the wall, slowly processing the horrifying reality that she would have to find a real job for the first time in her 40 years of life. Gavin sat paralyzed, pale as a sheet of paper, realizing the era of sports cars and platinum cards was officially over. The shift in power was absolute. They no longer looked at me. Like a tired old lady they could manipulate out of cash with a fake hug or a lie about a business emergency. They looked at me with the sheer terror. Reserved for a sleeping giant, they had accidentally woken up. However, Mitchell adjusted his glasses, and I swear I saw a glint of pure, unadulterated malice in his eyes, to proactively block any legal challenges, claiming Miss Harriet forgot you during a lapse of dementia. She took great care to leave highly specific physical legacies to each of you. items of immense sentimental value that unequivocally prove her absolute lucidity. Mitchell began reading the list. With every item, the humiliation dug deeper into my children's egos. When he read that Eric was inheriting the jammed manual cash register so he could learn to calculate lost time, my eldest son squeezed his eyes shut and swallowed hard, his arrogant lawyer pride entirely shattered. When he mentioned the silver thimbles for Chloe, she let out a pathetic whimper, knowing I perfectly remembered her snobbish disdain for manual labor. Julian listened to the news that he was the proud new owner of 3 tons of rusted screws. He didn't even speak. He just nodded slowly, fully grasping that the useless scrap metal was the perfect mirror for his catastrophic business ventures. Sylvia's mascara ran when Mitchell awarded her my grease-stained aprons, the uniform of my blood and sweat that she was so deeply ashamed to mention to her high society friends. And Gavin, the eternal spoiled brat, broke down, sobbing like a toddler, when he heard his grand inheritance was the old delivery bike with the blown-out tire. The dynamic had shifted permanently. The air in that boardroom was incredibly heavy, thick with a submission that had never existed between us before. For decades, I was the guilt-ridden provider, the mother buying love with wire transfers because I thought it was my duty. They had ruled my savings account like tyrannical kings. But in 20 minutes of legal reading, I had completely stripped them of their paper crowns. Sylvia was the first to completely break. She shot out of her chair, scrambled around the table to my side, and dropped to her knees on the thick carpet, desperately grabbing for my hand. "Mommy, forgive me," she wailed, staining my navy skirt with her tears. "I was an idiot. I was just scared to go to the hospital. I hate seeing sick people. I swear I love you, Mommy. Don't do this to us. Don't leave me out on the street. I'll take care of you now. I'll move into this hotel with you. I'll brush your hair every single day." I looked down at Sylvia on her knees. A month ago, this exact scene would have melted my heart, and I would have whipped out the checkbook to dry her tears. But now, I pulled out my green vinyl ledger and flipped to page 3. "Sylvia," I said, my voice dead calm, firmly prying my hand out of her grip. "August 14th of last year, I paid the down payment on your luxury SUV, $200,000. February 3rd, your kitchen remodel, $150,000. For 10 solid years, I have bankrolled a lifestyle your husband cannot afford. You do not love me, Sylvia. You love the comfort I provide. Get off the floor. Stop embarrassing yourself." She stood up, slowly, tripping over her own feet, and slinked back to her chair with her head hanging down. No one else tried to beg. They knew it was entirely pointless. Against the cold, hard math of my green ledger and Mitchell's legal fortress, emotional manipulation was completely useless. Eric picked up his copy of the medical certificate, folded it with robotic movements, and slid it into his suit pocket. He looked at me one last time, and I didn't see the arrogant attorney anymore. I saw a man utterly terrified of his own future. "Get out!" I ordered, slamming the ledger shut with a crack that echoed through the room like a judge's gavel. "This meeting is adjourned. Do not ever come looking for me again. From this second forward, any communication you need to have with me will go strictly through Lawyer Mitchell's office. Have a nice life, kids. Time to start job hunting." They stood up in total silence. They shuffled toward the door, dragging their feet, shoulders slumped, as if gravity had suddenly doubled its grip on them. I watched them walk out, one by one, through those heavy oak double doors. Not a single one looked back. They knew the well had run dry forever. When the door finally clicked shut behind Gavin, the last one out, I let out a long, impossibly deep sigh. I felt my lungs expand with brand new air, crisp and crystal clear. Mitchell packed his documents into his briefcase and looked at me with a cocktail of absolute reverence and relief. "You are made of iron, Harriet. In 40 years of practice, I have never seen anyone dismember 5 sharks with such elegance." I smiled at my old friend and rested my hand on my chest, right over the silk blouse. My flesh and blood heart was beating strong thanks to the surgeon. But my steel heart had been forged in the fires of their abandonment, and absolutely no one was ever going to shatter that armor again. The echo of that mahogany door clicking shut behind Gavin was the most beautiful sound I had heard in my entire 73 years on this earth. It was the heavy, definitive thud of a bank vault sealing shut forever. When I was finally alone in that massive boardroom with lawyer Mitchell and Valerie, I didn't feel the urge to cry. I didn't feel that suffocating lump in the throat that's supposed to choke a mother when she cuts off her young. The only thing I felt was clean air rushing all the way down to the bottom of my lungs, hitting absolutely no obstacles of pain, crashing against zero walls of disappointment. My sternum still gave me the occasional sharp twinge, but the bone was fusing. And it was fusing the exact same way two steel beams bond under the blue flame of a blowtorch, growing thicker and vastly stronger right at the weld. The next 3 months at the Grand Empire Hotel became my true recovery ward. I never turned that old cell phone back on. I had Valerie buy me a new one, with a number known exclusively to her, Mitchell, and the manager of my accounting firm. I attacked my healing process with the brutal discipline of a construction foreman. I walked the carpeted hallways, then graduated to the lobby, and finally started taking laps around Central Park across the street. I learned how to savor the silence. I discovered that the world is packed with incredible things when you aren't carrying the dead weight of 5 irresponsible adults on your shoulders. Buying I actually liked, no longer settling for gray skirts meant to hide the dust and grease of the hardware store. I had 3 custom power suits tailored in vibrant colors: navy blue, cherry red, and olive green. Old age doesn't have to be a uniform of depressing colors. Society desperately wants older women to become invisible, to fade into the wallpaper of our children's houses, knitting or babysitting, until we become completely transparent. I absolutely refused to be a ghost. I was Harriet, and my presence now commanded space, commanded respect, and walked with its head held high. But living in a hotel, no matter how luxurious, wasn't my endgame. I needed my own territory. I gave Mitchell explicit instructions. We sold the massive, drafty house in Fairview Estates to the hospital, finalizing the trust, and I used a chunk of my liquid capital to buy a property perfectly suited to me. It was a single-story ranch in the Elmwood district, a quiet neighborhood shaded by ancient oaks with wide, even sidewalks. There were no stairs to remind me of my physical limits. It had massive floor-to-ceiling windows that soaked up the morning sun, a spectacular backyard, and a small detached guest house that I converted, not into maids' quarters, but into my own personal woodworking shop. Valerie, my ironclad nurse, agreed to stay on as my personal assistant and companion, taking a salary that blew her agency pay out of the water. We moved in on a Tuesday morning. When I stepped inside my new house, breathing in the scent of fresh paint and cedar wood, I knew I had built my own personal heaven on earth. There wasn't a single photograph of my children on the walls. Instead, I hung paintings of landscapes I had always wanted to visit, and a massive grandfather clock that kept my time, not anyone else's. 6 months after my surgery, when the cardiologist finally gave me a clean bill of health and told me my heart was pumping like a woman 20 years younger, I decided it was time to go out and audit my emotional investments. First stop, General Hospital. I arrived in a plush town car I rented by the hour, driven by a highly discreet chauffeur. I walked right through the exact same automatic sliding glass doors I had escaped through half a year ago, hunched over and pale as a ghost. This time I walked perfectly straight, wearing my cherry red power suit, lightly leaning on a polished walnut cane that I used far more for swagger than actual support. The sharp sting of cheap lemon disinfectant was still baked into the walls, but it didn't make my stomach turn anymore. I took the elevator up to the cardiology wing. The hospital director, a bald man with round glasses, was waiting for me in the hallway alongside the head of nursing. When they saw me, they practically bowed with a reverence that bordered on religious devotion. The Harriet Trust had been fully operational for 4 months. They guided me down the corridor to a space that used to be a damp, depressing storage closet. Now, the door featured a gleaming brass plaque. When they opened it, I saw the brand new nursing staff break room. It had ergonomic recliners, a fully equipped kitchenette with real espresso machines, brand new microwaves, spacious lockers, and bathrooms with high-pressure hot showers. But the most important thing wasn't the fresh paint or the fancy furniture. The most important thing was sitting in one of those recliners, drinking a glass of water during her brief break. It was Lydia. When she saw me walk in, she almost dropped her glass. She jumped to her feet, wiping her hands on her crisp white scrubs, staring at me like I was a literal miracle walking out of the fog. I smiled, walked right up to her, and took both of her hands in mine. They were still the exact same gentle, compassionate hands that had washed my back when I felt like absolute trash. "Miss Harriet," Lydia stammered, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "You look beautiful. You look so healthy." All of this, they told us it was an anonymous donation from a former patient, but when I saw the name of the trust on our monthly bonus checks, I knew exactly who it was. "There is absolutely nothing to thank me for, Lydia," I replied, squeezing her hands firmly. In business, I learned very early on that strong foundations are the only thing holding the building up. You girls are the foundation of this place. The surgeons get all the glory, but you are the ones cleaning the blood, swallowing the abuse, and asking the exact right question at the exact right time. You handed me my dignity back with a simple bar of glycerin soap. This is just basic commercial logic. I pay my debts. Lydia nodded, swallowing hard to keep from crying in front of her coworkers. We shared a brief, honest hug. No fake theatrics, which I absolutely despise. I walked out of that hospital knowing my money was finally doing exactly what it was supposed to do, rewarding the people who actually break their backs. My second stop was the heart of the old neighborhood, exactly 2 blocks from my former hardware store. I had the driver park the town car in front of a small diner with a perfect view of the corner lot. I ordered a doubles espresso and sat right by the window. From my booth, I stared at the massive metal sign. It didn't just say the Ironclad Hardware Store anymore. Now, painted in brilliant, fresh yellow lettering, it read, "The Ironclad Hardware Store, Old Ray and Sons." The facade was spotless, completely scrubbed of the graffiti that used to stain it. The pallets of cement mix were stacked with military precision on the sidewalk, and there he was, Old Ray. He was wearing his heavy canvas apron, but his posture was completely different. He wasn't the employee dropping his gaze when a customer walked in anymore. He was the boss. I watched him bark orders at 2 young kids unloading a flatbed of rebar. I watched him negotiate with a contractor, gesturing with total confidence, throwing his head back in a booming laugh. The man looked 10 years younger. I didn't cross the street. I didn't go say hello. There was absolutely no need. Crashing someone else's success parties, just bad manners. I had handed him the bricks, but he was the one building his own empire, and I wasn't going to steal a single second of his glory just to show my face. I finished my espresso, slid a highly generous tip under the saucer, and went back to my life. The transformation was nearly complete, but the painting wouldn't be finished until I knew exactly what happened to the defective inventory I had purged from my ledger. That was Lawyer Mitchell's department. Mitchell visited me on the first Friday of every month. He'd sit on the back patio of my new house. Valerie would serve us fresh mint lemonade from our own garden, and he would deliver the detailed disaster report like a man reading the International Evening's News. I would sit and listen while sanding down small blocks of cedar for the bird feeders I was building in my shop. They couldn't do a damn thing, Harriet. Absolutely nothing. Mitchell told me one crisp October afternoon, chuckling low as he stirred the ice in his glass. Eric tried to appeal the judge's ruling on your mental competency, but the psychiatric board threatened him with a perjury sanction. Without your entertainment account to bleed dry, he couldn't make rent on his luxury office in the financial district. He had to downsize to a shoebox downtown. Word is, he's handling quickie divorces and fighting traffic tickets just to keep his kids in private schools. I blew the sawdust off a small slab of cedar, nodding calmly. The brilliant attorney was finally learning how to litigate in the trenches, where real money is actually earned. What about Chloe? I asked, swapping for a finer grit sandpaper. Chloe is the laughingstock of her country club. Since the Fairview Estates house went to the hospital, her husband had to take out a loan just to rent an apartment. She's been selling her designer bags and Italian shoes online. Last week, someone spotted her clipping coupons in the grocery checkout line. Rumor has it, they had to fire the maid, and she actually had to learn how to operate a washing machine. I smiled. Those silver thimbles I left her were probably serving as useless paperweights in her new, maid-free reality. Julian actually got a job, Mitchell continued, and that piece of news was shocking enough to make me drop my sandpaper on the table. Once your safety net vanished for his fake $1 million startups, the debt collectors started breathing heavily down his neck. He ended up taking a job as a night shift floor supervisor at a plastics factory. He punches the clock at 10 p.m. and walks out at 6 a.m. They say he lost his beer gut and constantly has bags under his eyes, but he hasn't asked for a single loan in 3 months. Well, look at that. Turns out he did know how to work once Mommy's mattress wasn't there to cushion his falls. Falls, I noted, taking a slow sip of lemonade. Sylvia is a whole different breed, Mitchell said, pushing his glasses up his nose. Her husband threatened her with divorce the second the credit cards bounced. Desperate to keep up appearances, she started baking cakes in her kitchen to sell to her rich friends. And guess what she wears to keep flour off her designer clothes? My old Kansas aprons, I finished the sentence, feeling a massive laugh bubbling up in my chest. Exactly. The grease and paint-stained aprons you willed her. At first, she was mortified. Her clients think it gives her business a rustic, artisanal vibe. The woman spends all day wrestling with flour and a hot oven. I leaned back in my wicker rocking chair, watching the late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the bougainvillea in my garden. The landscape was absolutely perfect. A poetic symmetry that not even the greatest novelist could have plotted out. We're missing one, Mitchell. What about the baby of the house? What about Gavin? Mitchell let out a booming, belly-deep laugh. That is the best one of all, Harriet. Gavin lost his sports car a week after the boardroom meeting because he hadn't paid the premium and the repo men towed it. He locked himself in his apartment, severely depressed, until he literally ran out of food. One day, Old Ray saw him shuffling up to the hardware store. Walked in with his head hung low, dragging his feet. He came to collect his inheritance. Old Ray rolled out the old delivery bike with the blown-out tire. Gavin sat right there on the curb, patched the inner tube with his own 2 hands, using a $2 patch kit, and pedaled off. He's working delivery for a food app now. He's out there getting sunburned, sweating bullets, dodging city buses in heavy traffic. I sat in total silence for a long time. I listened to the birds chirping in the garden and the soft scrape of the sandpaper under my thumb. I didn't feel an ounce of pity. I didn't feel a drop of remorse. I felt the ferocious, undeniable pride of a business owner watching her most disastrous investment finally start, yielding a return, even if it took a beating to get there. I didn't ruin them, Mitchell, I finally said, looking the lawyer dead in the eye. I birthed them a second time. Only this time I skipped the anesthesia, the coddling, and the blank checks. I ripped the blindfold off the hard way. I taught them that money doesn't magically grow on the branches of a family tree. In their 30s and 40s, they are finally fully grown adults. If they hate me for the rest of their natural lives, I do not care. I would vastly prefer they hate me while breaking a sweat to earn their daily bread than cry crocodile tears for me in front of an ATM. Mitchell raised his glass of lemonade in a silent toast. He knew I was dead right. When night fell and Mitchell said his goodbyes, I went back inside the house. Valerie was prepping dinner in the kitchen, humming an old tune playing on the transistor radio we kept on the counter. I walked into my bedroom, clicked on the bedside lamp, and pulled my old green vinyl ledger out of the drawer. I opened it, the center pages, the ones holding my kids' phone numbers, the drafts of the old will, and the tally marks of my abandoned days in the hospital were right there. I grabbed a thick black pen. With aggressive, heavy strokes, I slashed a massive X across every single one of those pages. Account settled, inventory closed, liabilities liquidated. I flipped to a brand new, completely blank page. The very first blank page of my new life. I wasn't going to log debts, disappointments, or lawyers' numbers in there anymore. I wrote out a short list in my sharp, confident handwriting. 1. Call the travel agency. Look into oceanfront cabins on the North Coast. 2. Buy more cedar wood for the shop. 3. Invite old Ray and his family over for a barbecue next Sunday. I snapped the ledger shut and dropped it on the nightstand. I walked over to the massive full-length mirror in the corner of my room. I slowly unbuttoned the silk blouse, exposing my bare chest. I ran my calloused fingertips down the long, vertical scar running straight down my sternum. It wasn't red or inflamed anymore. It was a thick, proud white line, an airtight seal. Society is violently wrong about older women. They think our wrinkled bodies are just waiting rooms for the Grim Reaper. They think our minds turn into dusty archives that nobody bothers to check. They assume our only remaining purpose is to act as silent fertilizers, so the next generation can grow comfortable and lazy. They are so incredibly wrong. Old age isn't weakness. It is the exact stage in life where you completely stop pretending just to make other people comfortable. It's the moment the social filter dies and you finally realize you are the absolute master of your own time and your own resources. I buttoned my blouse back up, smiling at the reflection of the ruthless woman staring back at me. My 5 children thought they had me fully under control, that I was just a worn-out tool ready to be tossed into the junk drawer. The surgeon might have wired my sternum shut with steel cables, but I was the one who armor-plated my own life, so nobody could ever use me as a stepping stone again. The content of this story is a work of fiction. The names, characters, businesses, places, events, and incidents described, including the ironclad hardware store, the Grand Empire Hotel, and characters such as Harriet and Lawyer Mitchell, are products of the author's imagination, or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to actual events and situations is purely coincidental. Furthermore, the subjects addressed in this narrative, including medical procedures, post-operative recoveries from cardiac surgeries, psychiatric evaluations, and mental health diagnoses, serve a purely narrative and entertainment purpose. Under no circumstances should this story be interpreted as medical advice, diagnosis, or professional treatment. Readers should always consult a qualified physician or healthcare professional for any matter related to their physical or psychological well-being. Likewise, the legal actions, estate decisions, drafting of wills, creation of trusts, and disinheritances mentioned in the plot are literary devices. This material does not constitute legal, financial, tax, or estate planning advice. Inheritance laws and notarial regulations vary drastically by specific jurisdiction. Therefore, no legal or financial decisions should be made based on the events of this work. For any issues regarding inheritance or wealth management, seek the guidance of a certified attorney or notary. The author, publisher, and distributors explicitly disclaim any liability for losses, damages, misunderstandings, or harmful consequences that may arise from the use or interpretation of this literary narrative.